Welcome to Free Human, a podcast where we explore the intersection of creativity, self-actualization, and the Dharmic path. I'm Indigo, a Dharma coach, medicine woman, and multidisciplinary artist. I guide humans through the process of remembering their true self so they can live in alignment with their soul. You are art that breathes. Your life is art. It's your intimate relationship with self and the universe. Every feeling, thought, movement, experience, and creation is your art. Your soul is singing a song, and the notes are weaving through the universe. To sing your soul song is to be free. This podcast is the fire circle in my Dharma garden, a place where we share our soul stories and medicine, nurture our curiosity, and weave our prayers into the collective. Thank you for being here. I am very grateful. Hello, friends. I'm welcoming Nikki Valenti to this episode of Free Human Podcast. She is one of the co-hosts of this podcast and also my business partner. We coach, mentor, host workshops together, among other things. Nikki has been a transformational life coach for the past 25 years. She connects you to your energy grid surrounding your physical body and translates the complexities of energy language in a direct way that your mind, body, heart, and soul can understand. The pure energy download ignites transformation and adjusts your alignment to your Dharmic path. This translated language orients you to your soul's unique blueprint and gifts so that you can embody your highest calling. She combines channeling, intuitive coaching, visualization work, and energy healing, which allows you to deeply transform within a space of love and mastery. In this episode, we dive into all things ego. My intention with this episode is for you to feel like you have a much greater understanding of what it is, how to work with it, and just how important it is to living the life that you desire. I'm going to play a little clip from the end of the episode right now, where Nikki shares what life feels like from being willing to remold her ego over and over. Because we hope to inspire you to traverse this territory rather than turn away from it.
I have more ability to be still in my life, to be present, to listen to the gorgeous threads that are moving through me and moving through other people, and being very appreciative of the planet.
Okay, now on to the episode. Enjoy. Okay, so first off, welcome to the Free Human Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is Nikki. We coach together. It's amazing. And today we are going to talk about the ego, which is a huge topic. And so what I think we're going to do is, to make sure that we cover everything we want to cover, we're kind of break it down by like sections. And so, yeah, we'll see how it goes. And then the other thing I wanted to say really quick is I was just thinking before we hit record about what this one initial intention that I had before I wanted to start this podcast, and it was to free my voice and to feel like I was on this journey of freeing myself. And as we were talking about the subject of the ego, I had a little like stress arise in me, and I thought to myself, like, oh no, will I do it well enough? Will I explain it well enough? And I thought, oh, that's my ego. My ego wants to intellectually be able to break down every word and every aspect of it and to like get it right.
Mm-hmm.
But my soul knows that whatever I say today, it's not only good enough, but it's like lovely. And that like the point of this podcast and the intention of it is to be of service from our hearts to help people to understand a subject that's really complex and to break down the different aspects of something so that it's more understandable.
Mm-hmm. Um, so I find it fascinating. The title of your podcast is Free Human, because isn't it true that we're all taking our individual journeys through life and needing to understand uh, ourselves as we relate to like the concept of the ego or the concept of soul? It's like a very internal process. And even though there's tons of books and tons of information out there, the reality is we do have to free ourselves, and we do have to take that individual journey to figure out how to do that. And all
Mhm.
that information may not be found in a book, you know? It may be found right in our human selves.
Mhm. Yeah, because yeah, like there's information we obtain in books, but really like it's our lived experience.
Right.
And it's so unique. Everyone's journey is so unique. How they input their life experiences and
Right.
how it relates to this information is it's just you
Yep.
in the universe. So,
Yeah.
okay. So the first thing I want to do with this is just define the ego. And so I did look at a bunch of definitions in Google, and this one I wanted to point out in particular. So it says the ego, an inflated feeling of pride in your superiority to others. Okay, so the reason I wanted to say that one first is I think for the longest time, and for a lot of people, they're afraid of their ego because they are defining it as like this bad aspect of themselves, like the aspect that thinks they're like better than others. And I think that like people want to pretend like almost like they're not egotistical. Like it's a word that's used all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like and it's also used by other people towards other people. Like, oh, that's their ego, or oh, they're being like when they think someone's being rude, they're like, oh, they're being egotistical. And so I think it's really misused. And this and I don't think this definition is helpful to understand it because it causes a split or rejection inside of self, and like you don't want to like look at that, and you want to like pretend like you aren't ego. But yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking of that when you read the definition. I was thinking, wow, that is such a limited definition of the ego and its purpose in our lives. So what is your definition of ego, Indigo? Just out of curiosity.
So yeah, I think in the simplest form to me it is your ego is kind of like your personality structure, and it's made up of all your different parts inside of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like how you kind of organize yourself.
Yes.
And because of that, it's like if your ego is you, then it is something to look at and
Right.
not to look away from. So, and we're going to get into this further, but I do want to read a description of Jung's definition. And
Okay.
so, Jung saw the ego as the center of the field of consciousness, which contains our conscious awareness of existing and a continuing sense of personal identity. It is the organizer of our thoughts and intuitions, feelings, and sensations, and has access to memories which are not repressed. The ego is the bearer of personality and stands at the junction between the inner and outer worlds. Um and so that's beautiful, but that also can be kind of hard to digest.
I had to close my eyes because I was taking in what you were saying,
Mhm.
and I did get lost in that definition.
Yeah. So that's kind of why I wanted to do this podcast to kind of simplify it even more.
Uh huh.
And so okay. So first, I think the first thing that I think is really really helpful for people to understand if they're going to even begin to like get to know and understand their ego is parts work. And
Hmm.
so if you think about yourself as having there is a psycho-spiritual model called internal family systems parts work, and it's Richard Schwartz. The book is No Bad Parts. It's a dense book, but it's like a life-changing book.
Hmm.
And um so it's to say that you have a lot of different parts inside of yourself. And the simplest example of this is like everybody has said, a part of me wants to go out and a part of me wants to stay home tonight. And those are two different parts inside of yourself.
Right.
And so we have lots of different parts. And when you start to look at parts work and start to get to know your parts, then you're going to have a much deeper understanding of your internal self. And so we have a lot of parts inside of ourselves. But let's just, for ease sake, say you have like 25 main parts inside of yourself.
Hmm.
And each one of these parts has different like thoughts, emotions, behaviors, sensations. They have almost like their own operating system within themselves. And you can tell. I mean, I think everybody has had these experiences. If you ask them, it's like, oh, you show up to either whether it's one of your parents or a friend, you show up to their house, and you wonder what part of them you're going to get that day.
Hmm.
Sometimes like they're really goofy, and then and another time they're like in a totally different aspect of themselves. And so
Yeah.
everybody knows that they have these internal parts, whether they're like consciously aware of them or not.
Hmm.
And so each one of these parts, having its own personality structure, has its own ego sense of ego, and then to the totality of them is kind of what the world sees as your self, essentially. And but that's why we have that. I think that's one of the reasons why we can feel so misunderstood in the world too, is because we have all of these different parts, but sometimes one person will only kind of have access to one of our parts primarily, and they'll think of us as just that part.
I know. I'm sitting here thinking about how it's completely realistic that I could be having a conversation with someone and I am expressing a part, but then when they respond to me, I could be accessing a different part. Like a different part could be coming to the surface. And I don't know, I never thought about that until today. Like how interesting that dynamic is in relationships. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
like you can be expressing yourself from one part and receiving from them in a different part.
Yes. I know we really there is no like limit to how the parts come in and out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it's also like, so I think that's why we're here, to just be experienced and not understood. Because, for
Mm-hmm.
example, it can take a lifetime to really, really, really dive into all these aspects of self. And we were never going to get to the end of our introspection and experience of our internal states.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people, even the people we love, yes, they can get to know our parts. If they understand the modality, they can definitely get to know our parts. But they're also changing too. And so yeah, we really are not here to be understood, which is
That is such a rub for me. Because I have a part that really wants to be understood.
yes.
Even as a child, I deeply wanted to be understood. As in my relationship, I really wanted to be understood. So how would you, and this, you can also say no to this if you don't want to answer this right now. But if you have that part, how would you work through that part? Like, what are some of the ways, like, Indigo and I are both coaches. We both, do this for a living. And I'm thinking this is a good opportunity to show people, like, how would you actually work with that part, for example, if it
Mhm.
came up for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's few different things. One is it's anytime you feel misunderstood, it's unfortunately unfortunately an opportunity to understand yourself deeper,
Hmm.
to really show up for yourself and how you
Hmm.
do that. And from a parts perspective, you have your self, your capital S self, like your higher self. Like, so if you are able to go into a space of accessing your higher self, and I think it's nice to think about it as almost like the divine mother, the divine father inside of you. And
Uh-huh.
like you are able to then witness this part of you and to validate it, to see, say, I see you. I do understand you, you
Hmm.
know? And so that is a practice that I think is very lovely.
Hmm.
But then I also think we're really communal beings.
Yeah.
And so it is being in circumstances in which people can see you more and actually validate your life experiences and your experience in the moment. I think that's really healing too.
Yeah, I was thinking about, how do I want to phrase this? I'm thinking about healing circles, and I'm thinking about supportive healing circles. And what are some things that you've experienced in healing circles that actually feel supportive to you if you are in a part? Um, so, for example, if I'm in a situation where I'm talking to a friend and they say something to me like, I have a part that's emerging and I would like to talk to you about this part. And then they start explaining what's going on for them. I find that to be very disarming to me. Like, it doesn't make me defensive, or it doesn't draw a part of me that wants to block or defend myself. So what example can you use like that, Indigo, to help people? I think when we're talking about parts work, there's one aspect of being aware of self and assessing self and understanding that this is a part and that you can work with that part. And then there's this other layer of communicating that part to somebody else. And then the third layer of that is, can you hold somebody as they are explaining their part? So to me, this is like a very healthy dynamic of communicating.
Yeah, if we all could utilize this model, I think we would have a lot healthier of communication and be able to hold space for each other's healing in much deeper ways. Because you're right, it's so disarming to say, like, if somebody is able to say to somebody, I have this part that's present. Can you hold space for this part? This isn't the totality of my being.
Right.
there's something, because it's only a part, it's like the energy feels smaller, like they
Right.
like it's not going to take over the other person. And knowing that it's just an aspect of yourself and not the totality of your thought is also really helpful for the other person. And also knowing that your parts are like your inner child parts, and there's something sweet to that. Like, to think
Yeah.
about it being an inner child part. And just to break it down really quick, we have like three different sections of parts. So in internal family systems, there's like the exiles, which are like the wounded inner child parts. Then there's the manager parts, and they're like the protectors. And then there's the firefighter parts, which a lot of times they are like numbing. They do numbing
Hmm.
behaviors a lot of times. So so if you are accessing like a wounded inner child part, I think that that's easier for someone to hold space for if they like understand the context of that one. And if we're using this model, it's like it is setting a container, and there is some parameters and in understanding within it. And so
Right.
that I think is allows for a people to space hold for each other in greater ways. And yeah, when you were saying like an example, the first thing that came to mind for me is just a really lovely experience that I had once in when I was in Belize. And I was in a at a retreat, and so I was in a healing circle, and we were doing ecstatic dance. And this was like a nonverbal aspect of myself, but in that day I expressed my unique soul's way of moving
Hmm.
in the world. That was the first time I did it in a circle. And it's hard for me not to want to cry because I felt more seen in that moment, like, than I felt like I ever had. And I wasn't exchanging words. It
Hmm.
was like I had found how my body innately moves and expresses, and it was being celebrated with because there was so much energy with the music and everyone around me. It was like I was seen in that experience, and it like changed me. So I do think we're
Yeah.
able to see each other sometimes.
Even without words, is what I'm hearing.
Mhm.
Some
Mhm.
of the most dynamic, deeply felt experiences when I'm going through something so deep is when someone is just willing to hold me in that space. You know, they don't need to say anything, they don't need to fix anything, but they're just there. And you can feel their presence, you can feel their wholeness with you. I don't think there's anything more profound in terms of my life. I think that is just so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so
I
beautiful. And when it happens, it's so beautiful.
mhm. I do think we have the I think the deepest healing does come in relation to with one another.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's so beautiful
Hmm.
to be able to witness.
So I think one of the reasons we're doing this podcast on ego is to show people that you can have that kind of relationship with yourself if you're willing to uncover these parts, listen to these parts, and sit with them and be with them as long as they need you to be with them, you know? Um, right now, I'm going through working with a part of myself that is full of rage. She's very tiny. She's 10, and I'm probably on my second or third week of being with her. And where we are now is this place of gratitude and love that I have for her protecting me the way that she has. And it's softening things, it's softening me, it's softening her. Um, so it's been like a beautiful journey. But what I'm saying is, when we talk about holding space, like, we can actually hold space for those parts of ourselves if we're willing to look at them and we're willing to be with them. Yeah, and we
Yeah.
don't have to say words. I haven't said many words to her. It's just more, I mean, I can't even really get close to her yet. It's more of, I'm just here. I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're touching on this is a great opening into another section of this, which is yes, this work is necessary, and it is with ourselves.
Yeah.
And the deep layers of going in, and of course we can do it with parts coaches and um, therapists and other
Yes.
practitioners for
Hmm.
sure, but you also have to do it with yourself,
Yeah.
because it's like, and so it is both. And the so what I think would be helpful to go into is when we talk about ego, when we talk about these parts, and we think about what is a healthy ego and what is an unhealthy ego. And um and of course that's like, of course this is a spectrum, and this is a very complex topic right here. And so when we think about our parts and the ego, and what is the ego doing, it is, what is it doing? It's keeping us safe.
Hmm.
The ego, like, it's protecting it's protecting by nature. And
Hmm.
so it will, what happens when an ego is keeping themselves safe and they're working through what I would call like an unconscious operating system or cosmology, um, is that they are potentially hurting other people in order to stay safe. And
What
go
would
ahead.
be some of those? Are there traits to that? Like, would it be fair to say control is one of those traits, or
I think it's
lying,
the primary
or
thing is control.
deception? Like,
Mhm.
I feel like sometimes we can't even necessarily recognize the ego. Um, but some of those, let's speak into some of those traits, like lying, for example. I'm going to lie so I don't, whatever, I don't hurt that person, I don't hurt myself. Um, that's one aspect of an unhealthy ego. Or, um, I mean, we can even swing to the other side, which might be like victim, like, I can't do this, or, like, you can swing that pendulum like many different directions, of how the ego protects us and what an unhealthy ego looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like we could also swap the words unhealthy and healthy with fear and love.
Yes.
And we could also like, and so no, actually I think, okay, so at the core that's what it is. I mean, it's like if you think about one part and you just think about it as like a cup of water, like how much of that cup is filled with fear and how much
Hmm.
is filled with love? And when you go and get to know a part and you dive into all the intricacies in it, it's shadow, it's how it just operates.
Hmm.
Um, you're gonna need to be alchemizing the fear. And the more you start to alchemize the fear in this one part, it eventually tips the scale so the glass of water has more love in it than fear. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's why we like when we work through a part, and I can give you an example too, like um my part that is the athlete was like my biggest like unhealthy egoic part when I was younger, because the operating system in the athlete part was based on the win lose, which
Mm-hmm.
is the dominant culture's programming. The sports paradigm is that if you win, you're better. If you lose, you're worse. Like, and it's just this strange game that we play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that operating system as a child, when you play game after game after game, and you're like trying to become the best, you're like, oh, I won. I'm better. And then it forms as part of the ego. And that sports is a huge part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so this like win loss finite game situation that's happening, it it built that system inside of myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to break it down.
I was going to say, for the people who are listening to us, what were some of the steps that you took to break it down?
um well, when I graduated from college, I never touched a soccer ball ever again.
Mm-hmm.
I could feel how much I wanted to move away from it. And I think for me, because I was only 22 at that time and I didn't have the tools that I have now, it was a
Right.
very slow process at that time. So it was
Mm-hmm.
like just not going near the paradigm of it. I didn't want to
Yeah.
watch sports. I literally rejected sports. That was the first step.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was the first step. Um and yeah, I mean, I think examining it, and I would ask myself, I even knew this as when I was younger, because so I had like the codes that I would later integrate for this, like I was already experiencing too. So
Right.
after the game, we would win or lose, and then we would show up the next day, and it was like nothing had happened. And I was like, well, reality isn't different because we won or lost. I was like, here I am standing on the same field and I'm just going to kick the ball again today. I was like, did it matter whether we won or lost? I was like, that didn't seem like it did. And so, and then I would listen to the coaches give us these like speeches, and they were like trying to work with our psychology. And so if we lost, I would watch them and see like to see what they would say. And they would basically give us a talk that was like about, I mean, they were essentially saying that like they were saying that we we were innately good just the way we are, that we can continue on, like, so they, and like, yet they wanted to win so bad. So I saw the contradiction in their speech.
Mm-hmm.
um and I also saw that like if we won, how like a couple seconds later it was like, well, what do you want to go eat for dinner? You know what it was like, it did it was like, what did winning get us? It's like nothing.
Right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the elements that we should speak to here is that when we're doing parts work and we're working with the ego, that we really have to be honest. So what I'm hearing you say is they weren't honest. They really wanted to win. Like they wanted to win. And they probably wanted to have a whole different conversation with you guys about why you didn't win, you know, instead of uh let's see, instead of this motivation of you're good the way you are, you know, you're a successful team in your own right, like those could be real truths, but I think there was a real honest thing that probably wasn't being said.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when we're doing our own parts work, I'm not saying of course your coaches should have gone to this level, but I'm just saying, when we're doing our own parts work, we really need to be honest with our part.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
with my rage part right now, I'm needing to be really honest about that part of myself. And I'm needing to be honest about how she's showing up and what she's participating in. And then sitting with her and dialoguing in such a way that, hey, this might not be the best approach anymore for us. Like, we may need to try some other things. So there's these honest conversations that have to go on with your parts, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
then they need to come out of you, um, in your reality.
Yes, so that's exactly what I was going to say next. So I was kind of touching on like I started to examine it. Like I was
Right.
inquiring about it, but then the next step was like, oh, the truth is I could see it and it's gross. It's like shame inducing.
Hmm.
And you have to feel the shame and you have to access that system inside of you and you have to feel through it. And so for me, it was multiple plant medicine journeys and I remember accessing it felt like an operating system in me.
Right.
And so then it took me through all the scenarios in which I had harmed others and I had been harmed. And so it
Yes.
was like, I am sorry. Please forgive me.
Yeah.
I love you. And so you go through that process of like, because when we are operating from fear, I was like, oh, yeah, like the way that sports and my parents like putting me in sports and how the coaches and my father and everyone interacted with me formed this aspect of my personality,
Hmm.
and that like wasn't good, it wasn't healthy for me and it wasn't healthy for other people. It was just like, so having to remove it is that process. And it's
Yeah.
facing it and seeing that it it existed, and then releasing of it is like exactly what you said, like in this 3D reality, I have to make different choices and have different actions, how I show up, how my behavior is, how I speak, how I but it's not just the external. It's not like faking it. Like it's not like being like, "Oh, okay, well, I'm just going to pretend like I don't feel like I won or lost or like I'm better or worse than somebody." It's like truly being able to hold a new picture of why we're here on earth with other people, I think. Which
Hmm.
is, I think at that time, that's when my acquired personal cosmology, which is like my understanding of reality
Hmm.
and like why I'm here, it shifted to say like, oh, wait, if I'm a piece of the whole, if I'm a physical manifestation of God here, but we're all innately one, that I have to be able to feel in my body that I'm like equal. And so
Yeah.
that to me, it's like I had an experience of feeling like I was a grain of sand. I was
Hmm.
so tiny in this huge hole, the whole of everybody on the planet, the billions of people, and then whatever's beyond this planet, right? And I had to hold that.
Yeah. And I can imagine that if you have a strong ego, I'll use the word ego, but if you have a strong ego that wants to be superior, that would be a very hard thing for that
Mhm.
ego to go through. You know, it
Mhm.
would, which I think is really beautiful about what you're saying, is like you were able to surrender to this identity that you created, an identity that others created for you, out of your superiority, out of your skills. Like, which feels really good to the ego, right? It feels really good at times.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see um, you can see that when we meet ourselves in these new layers, why the ego might want to be more malleable. Is that the word, malleable? Like more that you can,
Malleable. Mm-hmm.
malleable. Yeah, you can form it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, and this is, I think, why we're talking about this is that the ego can release. Like, everybody that's listening, the ego can release. It can allow you to have a different experience. It can allow you to be a different person,
Yeah,
no
because
matter how strong that is, because superiority is strong.
in
It's
sports,
strong.
it's an intense experience for kids to play sports, and I was a good athlete. And so in that reinforcement comes quite often, and it's really intense high to win a game or to win a regional championship, right? Like those things are like really intense experiences for
Right.
children to have. And um also I definitely fell into the category of like the golden child and like the
Hmm.
high performing child. And so in that, it was like, well, my parents love me if I perform well, well, what does that put me? It puts me into like a bind because I'm
Right.
like, oh well, I want to try to win. And I'm like,
Right.
"Oh, look, like, you see how good I am, parents?" Right? And so breaking down that structure inside of me in was like really beautiful. And what's left through the like breaking down of that structure is, one, I don't lose my ability to create. To
Hmm.
perform is to do something.
Hmm.
And so, and I also don't lose um, the many beautiful skills that I learned as an athlete. And um, the one thing that's like the healthy athlete to me, the like with the if you're going back to the cup analogy, with like enough love in the cup, is that like what I learned is that I show up like to what I'm working on like consistently. There
Hmm.
is a the infinite adaptability of the athlete. It's like the athlete knows that it must kick the ball every day in order to achieve its goal.
Right.
And so through my lens of that transformation of that part, in service to love, in service to my soul, is that my athlete part like walks the steps every day, which is like kicking the soccer ball. It's doing the tasks to create the life, the art, the skills inside of myself that are in service to my soul now.
Right. Do you think, okay, so I want, I feel like you're touching on something really important for people who are listening to us. Um, that the ego, if we get away from being right or wrong, right? The ego is something that helps us develop into who we are. And those are good, like I don't even want to say good and bad, but for the sake of this conversation, we developed good habits from that, or we developed some bad habits from that. And I also feel like since I've been doing this for so long, that our ego isn't ready to transform until the minute it's ready to transform. So you walking away from sports or never picking up a soccer ball again was sort of the signal to the ego that, oh, we're gonna transform from this place. We're gonna unbind ourselves. We're gonna learn some different things. um I think that's just something we inherently need to know about ourselves. Like, we our worlds and how we live it and the experiences that we're having are wanting to have bring us to this place where our ego wants to transform. It wants to. Like, think about some of the predominant themes in life. Like, I want to be loved. I want to get closer to people. I want to connect. I want to succeed. I want to be an artist. I want to be seen. Like, all of those things are invitations from our ego and from our parts to kind of take a deeper dive. Like, oh, why aren't I as creative as I want to be? Like, what is it about me that is holding me back? And what part of me wants to show up to help me do that? Or that wants to express through me that's afraid? I mean, there are some running themes in life that most people butt up against. And when they're ready, their ego will step forth and be ready to support them.
Yeah, so what you're pointing towards is the fact that the answers to what people are seeking is to go into these parts and to examine the personality structure, the ego in each part. And when
Yes.
it has fear, it needs to be alchemized.
Yes.
And so that is the way to transform the part. So what's really cool about this, okay, so I feel like this segues into this concept that, um, okay, let's just go back to like saying we have 25 dominant parts within ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
like just because it's a little bit easier to hold that. Um, in those parts, the totality of those parts are going to, what you're going to see is the representation of where you're at in life,
Right.
and what you're trying to do is all because of the makeup of these parts. And if these parts are unknown, the first step is to get to know them. And then let's say you've got to know them, then the amount of fear they're holding, there's a direct correlation to what you would like to manifest or experience in this reality is based on how much fear they have is where you're at essentially in
Mm-hmm.
this. And I like to think about it this way because then you look at the parts, like how they function. You have to really break it down. It's like, how is their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, like how do they show up in all the different aspects of their life, whether it's like work, family, with yourself, with your art, right? And when you
Mm-hmm.
examine that part and you have to alchemize through the fear, that part eventually, the maladaptive behavior in there, it becomes healthy. You give it new roles. So it
Yeah.
has new parts, and then those parts become in service to what you're trying to do. But fundamentally, I guess there's one other aspect. When I say what you want to do, I feel like we need to define what that actually is, which is, there's like, okay, I'm not going to use the word most. Um, when you are trying to obtain, no, okay, how do I describe this? So, okay, so what I'm trying, okay, overall, what is a life that is egoic in soul based, for example? And so,
Mm-hmm.
how
This
does
is an
somebody
interesting topic.
even know what that is? Because I mean, if you just ask somebody like, "Hey, is your life like egoic?" It's not. I don't know one person that's going to say yes,
Right.
right? And so,
Right. They're not. No.
so, um, what is the difference between your life, um, what your dreams are, being truly based in what your the deeper crevices of your soul is, and
Well, I would say that if you're living a soul based life, Oh, hold on. I'm gonna breathe into this and ask the
Mm-hmm.
universe for the answers to this. So if you're living a soul-based life, you are actually listening to the whisper, which is your intuition, and you can distinguish between it and your ego. And then once you distinguish that, you then take action to orient yourself to do the activity or the thing that the soul is asking you to do, which, um, right now my soul is asking me to speak more publicly about the information that I have and have acquired and have learned from them, as an oracle on our planet. So my soul is asking me to do that. So then my physical body and my physical activities are, how do I make myself more visible? So I'm doing this podcast, right? I'm doing workshops online. I'm doing the activities. So that journey is based on my soul. And as I'm doing my soul's journey, I am butting up against my ego. So I'm afraid. I don't know if I don't know if I can do this, the things my ego are saying. And then when my ego is speaking to me, I'm dipping down into the parts work to see if I can unburden those parts so that I can actually do the journey that my soul is asking me to do. So it's like it all weaves together. It all weaves together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, generally, when your soul's asking you to do something, I believe you're going to have some oh shit moments. Like, oh shit. Like, here we go. And I'm going to confront all these aspects of myself that I haven't before, um, at least in this lifetime. And yeah, I think when your soul's speaking to you, you're going to have some of those moments.
Yeah, I think when you're following that path, it is what you said, it's the path into the parts.
Yep.
And so I wanted to give an example of.
Well, go back and answer the question. Like, I want to hear your thoughts on what you were asking. Like a soul. Well, let me see if this is even the right question. What is the difference between a soul led life and an ego led life? Like, how
Yeah.
would you answer that?
Yeah. So I think sometimes it's helpful to answer when you answer questions, they become like you have to separate the concepts
Mm-hmm.
because then you can understand it. Now, even though the answer isn't separate, because just to say this one thing about it's not like, okay, it's not like one or the other because our egos are personality structure. So it is always working, like our ego is part of our soul based life.
Yes.
Right. But I do think it's helpful to separate them, just like let's separate them a lot so you can see, because
Yes.
it's the first step, I think, in like being able to understand it. And so, um, here's just a really, the keeping up with the Joneses is the most extreme example of the egoic life. It's kind of living like according to the dominant culture's theme, depending on when you were born, right? And so it's like the boomer generation, it was like very clear. It was like you work at a job for a long time, right?
Yes.
You acquire your assets and you work your whole life and retire.
Yes.
And like that
Whether
is,
you're happy or not.
yes, that's
Mhm.
the ego.
Yeah. Whether
I
you're
mean,
connected or not.
yeah, it's like
You know.
where the soul is like, it's almost like in the West, especially like a severing of the soul that
Yes.
has happened. And so there's a level of disconnection that's really high in the West Um, and so that's like an extreme example of it, you know? So, and, but a lot of people are not living, well, there is a lot of people still living in straight from there, right? And it's like the acquiring of money
Mm-hmm.
and like, and assets and everything that's not sustainable
Mm-hmm.
that's happening, right? And it's like, why are you acquiring those things? And it's if for personal safety and comfort. It's like the ego's like trying to protect itself, like this is mine, I'm gonna hold it and keep it
Mm-hmm.
so that I can just like live and be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not considering the greater web of life and the earth and the animals and community and humanity and the next generations and all of that. It's like
Mm-hmm.
centered on like what's the word I'm looking for? Like self-preservation
Mm-hmm.
now. And it's um we were raised in that culture. So people acquired that like programming. And I think a lot of people are waking up from that. Tons
Mm-hmm.
of people are. So a lot of people are kind of in the middle, right? They're just in the messy middle of it. They're
Mm-hmm.
like, they feel their soul, they can hear their intuition. They still feel a lot of fear in following their intuition. And they're in the middle of doing parts work and they like are kind of got like this, they're kind of still in this old paradigm and then they're trying to get into the new, like there's this like there's so much in that middle that's like the navigating of like how do I move from how my ego has built my life to this life that is more in service to soul.
Yeah. So for those listening, because I've heard you say this a lot in our coaching practice, with people who are confronting this part of their ego, that you don't necessarily have to leave the dominant culture to find your soul or your deeper parts. Um, yeah, can you speak to that? Because I feel like we've talked to many clients about this, that within that structure that they're living in, the dominant culture, that they can still find their soul's voice and they can still find their parts. And that it's really important sometimes within that dominant culture to actually find those things.
Yeah, so I think that, and you know, and it sometimes it can be hard for me to speak about something I haven't like written 10,000 words on and then
Yeah.
like distilled down. And so, which I haven't done on this yet, but I think it has to do with wherever you are right now, like understanding what your personal cosmology is like that. And you can think about that as like the, it's like, it's like you have a map inside of yourself, a
Yes.
template of some sort. And that template is, until you've examined it, it's built off of what your parents was and what the culture you grew up
Right.
in was. And so for me, my parents were like already on the spiritual path.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I had a little bit of an alternative template in me from the get go. And so, but I would say mine was almost like a hybrid. I had like half the culture and half my parents' template, which wasn't part of the dominant culture. Whereas a lot of people's their parents' template was in direct correlation to the dominant culture's
Yes.
template. And so an example of that would be like
Mm.
um it's all of the rules and values and behaviors of the institutions and the sports as a paradigm, right? Like is one of them. Like so it's like the fear-based religion is a huge template for a lot of people, and working with people trying to remove this like incredible amount of shame they actually hold from their interaction with like fear in religion. And then it's also like um so it kind of comes down to like that there's ideologies that are like right and wrong, good and bad. It's all the black and white type
Mm-hmm.
of thinking. And to think that like other people, that there is a right and wrong, that like, oh, these people don't believe what I believe, so therefore they're wrong and I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And this operating system is like unhealthy. And that's why the whole world is like arguing with each other all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that this like these personal cosmologies that the majority of the culture have are harming each other. So the other way to look at it is to say like, yes, we are all supposed to have our own personal cosmology and that they are supposed to differ, but they have to be rooted in love, not fear. And so if we look at like universal law, universal principles, we're looking at like a core fundamental level, and then add in it's so hard to, okay, I would say like what's so hard to talk about it is I want to like categorize everything correctly, but I'm just going to pretend like these words I'm going to say are part of a soup
Mm-hmm.
so that you could understand it better, because it's like I haven't broken it down by like all these different categories in which I've somehow created this one paragraph of text that I could say that like sums it up. It's really complex. So it's like it's like instead of reading the book and it being knowledge in my head, it's like these top books that I read, like I started to embody it.
Right. Talk
And
about
so
embodiment, because I think people get really confused with the word embodiment.
yeah, so it's like I listened to so many podcasts and books, and I was like, it was opening up my, oh, there's like what it did is it opened up like into new realms. Every
Right.
time I would read a book or listen to podcasts, I'm like, oh my gosh, this could be part of my reality. This person is a real person. Like, wow, how they think and like the what they're talking about. But I just kind of left it in my head, and it was like opening really slowly for me, something inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to a point where I started down the plant medicine path.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, what the plant medicine did was it it opened up the entire operating system within me, and it started to move all the pieces.
Right.
And then what it did was it allowed me to begin to learn what integration was and what embodiment was. And
Mm-hmm.
it like for me, this is just me, it felt like it downloaded the template of how to integrate and how to
Yes.
embody. It like downloaded the information inside of me. So suddenly I would read a book, and then suddenly the book would go into my body, and then I would start living differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so like and so when I would interact with someone's material, such as Bill Plotkin, he has this book called The Journey of Soul Initiation. And so instead of being like, wow, what a cool concept, what a cool book, it was like the book entered my system, and then it started to rewrite my code inside of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book like worked through my body. And so in that process, it wrote new code inside of me that is like now part of my new cosmology.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is embodiment is when you see something or read something that you want to experience as your own. You start, you start allowing yourself to experiment and experience those topics in your life. So you actually bring them into your life. And then when you bring them into your life, you have an experience of what that feels like to have that thing in your life. And then from there, it becomes part of your life.
Yeah, and I do think that the bridge for me between the ego and soul was my body. I got
Yes.
into my body. Like it in I didn't leave my mind. I thought I had left my at first I was like, okay, I've left my mind, I've gone into my body. But then I
Yes.
realized that it's like about coherence
Mm-hmm.
and that I'm connecting it all. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was like the connection into the body. And when I realized that the body, like from a tantric perspective, is the template.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the template for the soul-based life.
So I'm just now getting into the body. Um, so my orientation and my cosmology is more celestial, and being born with a gift, it was like I was raised celestially with heavenly concepts, and that's what I was focusing on really the majority of my life until now, when my spiritual team is asking me to come fully onto the planet and teach and inform. So I have been integrating and embodying spiritual concepts and emotionally unraveling my parts for a very long time. And so now here I am just learning about the body. You know, how does this feel? What else do I need to unburden about myself that I haven't in this journey I've been on so far? Um, how am I going to show up in these spaces that my soul's wanting me to show up in? So my bridge has been heaven, nobody, earth, and now body. Heaven, earth, and now I have to figure out the body.
Yeah, and you're speaking on something so cool, which is like that our personal cosmologies and our experiences here are unique.
Very
And so
unique.
we're not supposed to be the same, but if we're at least fundamentally rooted in love, there are ways to coexist on the planet in a regenerative way
Right,
overall. And
right.
so, but I do love that you're speaking on that because it's like, yeah, it's different.
Very different.
Hmm.
And I mean, this would be, I feel, an appropriate time, a weird thing to do, but an appropriate time to really discuss our services, Indigo. Like, this is what we do. Like, we are able to actually listen to your unique soul and be able to guide it with all these principles, using parts work, helping you integrate, alchemize, embody, individualize, and so that you are standing in your own seat of power, your own seat of love at the at the that's what we do. I think it's important to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point because it's not like we're like, here is the map.
Right.
We're helping you see how to
Your map.
construct yours and then walk but the map isn't the territory. So like it's like learning how to navigate, like to see yourself, how you're constructed,
Right.
and then to navigate the terrain. And it is so unique.
Right.
And so being able to at least be able to read and guide through what we can see and what experiences we bring people through allows them to see themselves better, move through what they need to, right? Like
Right.
to individuate and actualize what their soul wants them to do.
Right. And
So,
it feels really good to you because you're living your own language. you're living your own language and you're
Yes.
helping your own ego to blend with the soul. It's quite
Yes.
beautiful. It's quite
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah, so for me, because I was an athlete, instead of going, well, I'm not an athlete anymore. I didn't pick up the ball after I was 22. I didn't kick the ball.
Yeah.
But now, if I would have just rejected that part and never looked at it again, that would have been hidden from me, a huge aspect of myself.
Right.
And so by
And parts that you need.
integrating the athlete, it's part of my reality is being an athlete. Now
Right.
at 43, I'm an athlete. What does that mean? It means something so deep in terms of walking my path of soul.
Right.
My athlete is walking the path of soul. Like the part of me that like was the most difficult to understand as a child. It was my most I didn't understand because the adults I was interacting with the adults and it caused a split inside of myself. And
Mm-hmm.
so by repairing all of that and like integrating the athlete, she shows up every day for me. And
Yeah.
it's like and so yeah, that it's like my personality structure is that of the athlete. And so then I spend the rest of my life honoring the athlete. And it's in all of these like tiny little ways and these huge ways too. Like one of them is like the athlete on a bench. If you're a woman and you're an athlete on a bench, what do you get to do? You get to spread your legs apart. An
Mm-hmm.
athlete doesn't cross their legs on the bench. I
Right.
don't cross my legs. I sit with my legs spread apart.
Mm-hmm.
It honors the inner athlete in me and it feels like me. And that's
Mm-hmm.
so little, but it's so huge to me. When I sit with my legs apart, I feel so like myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So beautiful. But
Mm-hmm.
then it's also the athlete in the most major way that is able to accomplish all of my creative projects
Mm-hmm.
hands down. Like um it's the masculine structure within my projects of like now you do this task, now you do this task, now you do this task, and then they all add up to the whole. And it's like I'm practicing
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And so it's so cool how like how these parts inside of us and our ego like walk this journey in life with us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think it would be so cool to circle back to this continued discussion on what it's like to develop a new personal cosmology that is soul based.
Mm-hmm.
And I had talked a little bit about like how my body is a template. And for me, it's the way that I'm constructed is that I interact with information, it comes into my body, and then I see how it begins to interact in my 3D reality. And then I also work on integrating that through behavioral change and then it like evolves me essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I had said like the Bill Plotkin's book, The Journey of Soul Initiation, but I feel like um I think I want to talk about a few other aspects of this soup so that like I was saying I was going to throw out some words. I think I went like down a rabbit hole though. Like the words that I've interacted with are like one tantra,
Mm-hmm.
universal principles.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think that like for people specifically their work has really informed my template, which is
Mm-hmm.
Carl Jung, Bill Plotkin, Mark Gaffney, and Eric Godsey. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like their work, like when it filtered into me, it like changed the fabric of my reality so much that like the way that my parts are interacting on the 3D plane that are working towards the evolution of my soul like shifted significantly. But then there's this other aspect that I feel like, which is that mentors and other, whether they're coaches or guides or whatever, when we interact with a medicine woman, for example, they have their personal cosmology formed.
Mm-hmm.
So when we come into their sphere, we are interacting with their code essentially.
Yes.
And that code then transfers to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like it doesn't just innately transfer. The way it transfers to me is if you hear something, it could be through language, it could be through sight, like you're seeing how someone's operating or, their being. You could be experiencing their energy, right? There's like a lot of different layers to it. But when you take that experience into your body, it's going to register as truth for you or not. Like
Yes.
if you resonate with it, then you get to have a piece of your code. And a very tangible example of this is I was once sitting with a medicine woman and she began praying. And she prayed for a long time. And it was the most embodied prayer I had ever witnessed. And in that moment, being in this person's field, it was like a huge epiphany came to me. And I was like, oh, the path of the medicine woman, the path of soul is prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Prayer. I was like, and then it was like everything I need to know comes through the form of prayer. And because I witnessed this really deep embodiment of prayer, I like downloaded that piece of information. And then it's like a tool inside of me now. And of course, it's up to me to practice it. And if I were then to practice that tool, I would receive more information.
Mm-hmm.
And it would inform my path of
Mm-hmm.
soul.
And it's up to you to receive or accept the code too.
Yes,
Like,
because you could hear something and be like, that's not for me.
Right. Right. I want to distinguish that for people who are listening and possibly going to be downloading codes, that you want to feel into that and make sure it's an appropriate code for you, an appropriate thing that you want to um, receive, and who you want to receive it from.
Yeah. And to get like even more nuanced, here's an example of how to know or not know. Like for example, in my case, when I look at the totality of my life from a dharmic perspective, I worked in the business world for a long time in a very mental space. And
Mm-hmm.
in one of the places that I do what you would call bridge work is in that space. And the Western mind is very mental. And so if I were to, for example, completely quiet that aspect of myself, then I wouldn't be as in service in my bridge work. And so what actually serves me is to learn how to sharpen my mental capacity
Mm-hmm.
and to keep it and to understand it and to hone it, because it's a communication tool
Mm-hmm.
to talk from one mind to another mind,
Mm-hmm.
and then to help that mind move down into their heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when I view my path, I have to know what aspects need to be remolded and how they have to be remolded. And other
Right.
people's path, that may not be a part of it at all.
Right. Um, I think what you're really speaking to is this idea that, and it's really not an idea, it's a truth, that we are walking art pieces. We are life artists. We can form and shape ourselves into anything that we would like to co-create, um, as long as we are willing to have the experiences to create them.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can do that. That's the this is the place that humanity is going. That we are co-creators. We can co-create the reality that we want. We have many tools and many ways to achieve that. I mean, one of the ways that we've done that from a perspective that we all can understand is manifestation. And manifestation is just
Mm-hmm.
one tool of many.
Yeah, because this you're feeding right into the next thing, which is that these personal cosmologies, when they are rooted more in protection and control and ego versus soul, together the totality of all of our personal cosmologies is making up what we experience on earth as a collective.
Right.
And so if we understand that we are the co-creator, that like our job is to look at these parts and reconstruct our inner self to then that manifests a new reality that then plugs into the collective as a whole.
Right. So, like, what I think would be fun right now, or what my guides are wanting me to bring up, is reimagining what our planet could really be if we were all taking personal responsibility over our cosmology. Like, for example, we might evolve to a place where we can't possibly even think about harming another person. We just can't do it. Um, which is so far from where we are now, but it's possible. If
Mhm.
we decide that we don't want to hurt ourselves anymore and we want to look at those parts that hurt and those parts that, there's that saying that hurt people hurt people. If we look at those parts inside of us that hurt, that want to hurt other people, and every single person was doing that, we would be having a different experience. Humanity would be. Like,
Yeah.
in that creation, we are reimagining what our human interactions can actually look like, which could be completely different than what they do what they look like now.
Mhm. Yeah.
I
Yeah. I
mean,
wish
it's
everybody understood that inner child healing is how the planet evolves for to become more beautiful.
right, and that we would never want to control someone else's experience of their inner child in this world. I mean, think of the education system, for example. That's all they do is
Mhm.
damage the inner child.
Mhm.
Because not every child learns the same way, not every child needs the same things, not every child wants those things. Like, I mean, it's really interesting that if we all decided as a collective that we were going to raise our frequency and vibration and we were going to focus on love more than fear, and we realized that we were all interconnected, that we would be creating a new earth,
Mhm.
and we
Yes.
would be creating a new self. Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
that's
it's
why I
quite
wanted
beautiful.
to brave talking about the ego today, because it's like the understanding of the ego is like in many ways the first step to opening the door to getting into the inner child work, because
Hmm.
the ego is so protective, can be so protective that
Yes.
it doesn't open the door.
Right. Because it's scary.
Mhm.
And it's okay for everybody who's listening.
Mhm.
It can be scary. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I wanted to really talk about before we jump off here, I wanted to leave people with this sense that there is plenty of places to go to get support if you're going to open up these doors. There's therapy, there's parts work, there's coaches, there's energy clearings, there's medicine women, there's oracles, there's, plant medicine. There's so many different modalities. The one thing I do want to suggest to people if they go down this road though is that they have the support that they need, you know? Like if you're going to do a medicine journey, for example, that you have support on how to process whatever comes up for you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one of my I guess one of my worries, about plant medicine is that it opens up all these spaces in people and then they leave. Um, and I don't like that idea for people. I don't, in many different ways too, not just plant medicine, but I don't like the idea that people open and they may not know what to do after they open. So there's many, many places to get help. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point because okay, so when you begin to go into parts work and inner child work, it's like the most intense work you'll ever
Yes.
do. And it's like the breaking down of the ego, which is every time you break down one of these parts personality structures to rebuild it, that's what they would call that death rebirth process is
Yes.
that. And so you like unburden the part and it like gets re it you become new, you change so much in that
Right.
process. And this journey can be really hard without support. And I think people underestimate the amount of support actually because and I think it's like I mean I love therapy. I have a therapist, but it's like one time a week for 1 hour is not enough support if you're going to dive into like really getting on the path of soul.
Right.
It's like it does take more support than that, or it's like dicey. It can be dicey because like
Hmm.
for all the people that I know have like really gone down really deep, definitely were surrounded by people and circles and groups and communities to support them.
Right.
Because if you try to get the support in the mainstream culture, which is predominantly egoic, you may be shamed or misunderstood or like it actually not help you because if someone doesn't know how to hold space for you in the way that like space needs to be held, it like can really be challenging.
Right. Right. Which is something we touched upon in the podcast, is making sure that you are choosing uh, situations where people are informed on how to consciously relate. People are trauma informed. Um, this is where the body comes in full force, as the body will tell you if you're in an environment that feels right.
Mhm. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Your body will let you know if you're safe or not.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap for today.
It is, what I would like to just riff on ego death. I mean, we can like keep it in or keep it out. I don't know. But
Yeah, let's do it.
like what about ego death? Like oh man.
Mhm.
Like I want to talk about that. Like
Let me think of I can think of
yeah,
an
like we don't
example.
we don't have to leave this in, but I just was like, oh, there's something, it's popping up in my consciousness.
Um, well, one thing I don't think it like, while it could come in this form, most of my ego deaths hasn't been like some, kind of going back to that initial definition that I don't think is helpful, like an inflated feeling of pride in your superiority to others. Like
Hmm.
most of my ego deaths hasn't been like, oh, this part of me that was like superior or rude or mean, like is gone now. Like
Hmm.
that's not what it is, which I think is helpful to like um say. It's like when you have a part who could be like super scared, and it's
Yeah.
a part that like has behaviors that when you feel unsettled in your life, it does a set of behaviors, and those behaviors you don't like, and they maybe feel like unsteady, for example, and they repeat. And when you finally get in contact with that part and the exile behind it, the inner child, and you do the healing, this part's behaviors, these coping strategies, they disappear. In this part becomes like a different aspect of yourself, and it feels like this aspect of yourself that you're very used to showing up isn't
Yeah.
there, and
It
it's
can
very
feel like a
repeated.
death. It can
Yeah.
feel like a death. It feels like a death of self. Like,
Yeah,
I
and
don't
then
know who I am anymore. Like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to orient in this new space. Um, yeah, it's like a collapse of self. Is that fair to say? Like a collapse of self,
mhm.
or an aspect of yourself that you've been operating from. Um, yeah, and I think we throw that word around a lot, ego death. Like, I'm having an ego death. Um, but it's a pretty painful process when it's happening. You're collapsing a part of yourself. It's like dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could be like you in this path, you I don't know if collapse is the word, but you like reroute these aspects of a part that you may really love too.
Yeah.
Like you may love these aspects of yourself. So an example of this would be like the comedian in me. This part, like it took me so long to be funny in life, but when I was finally able to be funny, I was like, thank God I can like actually say humorous things now, right? And then I got to this point where I had this one experience one day, and I hurt one of my friend's feelings with a joke, and I had an instantaneous ego death that day. The part
Um,
broke that day. And I was like, I harmed my friend. I wouldn't want this. And then I was like, I'm going to examine my jokes and the origins of them.
yeah,
And
and
when
the
I
intention behind them.
Yeah, so then
Hmm.
when I went and looked in them, I had to dissolve my inner comedian, and it was so painful
Yeah.
because like it was how I like had fun in the world and how I related. And so for 2 years, I like almost didn't say any jokes because I had to reroute them, and like my jokes had to be from a whole new place, and it could not come from the previous place.
Hmm.
And I remember the first time I started to make a few jokes. I Because like I was like, I'm gonna one day. I knew it took me a long time, but like one day I'm gonna be able to speak a spiritual joke, and it's gonna be. And I was nervous at first to
Hmm.
do it.
Hmm.
um, and little by little, I did get my sense of humor back, but it is actually not as much as it used to be. Um, but
Right.
yeah, and I realized that the energy I got from that previous comedic version of me was
Hmm.
actually propping my sense of self, because that's what a lot of jokes are. They're actually mocking other people,
Yes.
or they're like well, they're, yeah, either the culture or the person in front of you, But really, like, if you look at like, there's truth inside the joke, and it's actually most jokes are just incredibly harmful, actually, at their core. And
Yeah.
so, um, but yeah, then it was like, can I laugh at myself? Right? Of course I can do that, and that's really helpful. So there's like, then I started to see the aspects of laughter in comedy that are incredibly helpful for the human experience because um like uh if you don't laugh you're going to cry. Like, laughing is such medicine.
Right.
And I mean, you were with me when I was on a plant medicine journey in which laughter was actually one of the aspects of the container that were holding me through the experience. And through this experience, um there was humor was the avenue my soul chose to take in order to process something deep.
Mm-hmm. It was so funny, y'all. I mean, it really was funny.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, long story short, during the entire plant medicine journey, I only had a Southern accent, and I had no ability to access my Midwest accent no matter how many times I tried.
I can't remember what it was you were saying. Like, it was so funny. I can't remember exactly what you were saying over and over again, but it was hilarious to me.
Yeah, at one point I go, "You mean like country music stars? They get on top like a stage and they just yeehaw in front of millions of people, and everyone goes wee!" And like, I mean, it's just like,
It was
oh,
really funny.
um,
Okay, so then for our listeners who are maybe sitting there going, why in the hell would I want to do any of this?
that's a, that's a good point. Who wants to have an ego death?
Um, what what can we say that the benefits are? Like, for me, living a soul-based life, for one, makes my life feel very expanded. Like, I feel I have more access, I have more access to joy, to bliss, to connection, obviously more access to the other things too, sadness or anger. But I just have more access. I have a range. Um, I have more um, ability to be still in my life, to be present, to listen to the gorgeous threads that are moving through me and moving through other people, and being very appreciative of the planet and what it has to offer. So we talk about this journey, and we can see it as being hard for sure, but it's also so beautiful to be living in that place just as a regular human being, you know?
Yeah.
So that's just how I feel about it, why I do the work.
Yeah, that sounds really beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. This
Hmm.
is really good that we're touching on this. This is a great thing to end on, which is like,
Yeah.
why would you do this?
Yeah, because I'm thinking about the podcast itself and going, crap, this doesn't sound fun at all.
Yeah, we
And
don't want you to listen and be like, "Well, I'm not having one of those."
right.
Um, okay, so I would say when I was living through my ego, life felt very cyclical, like very repetitive, but I felt like I was in a loop I couldn't get out of, and it felt like a carrot on the end of the stick, or it's like I had a generalized anxiety that was always there,
Right?
and it was like this can't be all there is.
I
Like,
said that all the time.
this just can't
Yes.
be it. And then I remember asking myself over and over, like, if I died tomorrow, would I regret my life? And my answer was yes.
Hmm.
And
Mine too.
and so it's just, yeah, the cyclical nature of it was torturous. And so now it feels more like, it's the spiral. It's like we are expanding, but then we do go back to something to clear it, and
Yes.
then we keep going. But it has this like open-ended, expansive feeling. And like that feeling of like walking a path that's unfolding feels like a flower blooming. Like it's so beautiful
Right.
feeling, and
Yes.
it's like you begin to fall in love with the unknown because you don't know where you're going on this path. Like you do in the ego path is like you're trying to get to a certain goal and you're trying to always know what's going to happen and try to
Right.
control all the variables.
Right.
And when you walk the path of soul, I think at first it was like being willing to trust the universe
Yes.
was the first step. And that was so scary. And for me, I mean, I constructed we construct stories, right, inside of
Hmm.
our mind to all the time. And so for me it was like I leapt out into the world of spirit. Like I just like jumped off a cliff and was like, "Wee!" That's
Yeah.
how I did it, you know? And and then the next step for me was I kind of was like kind of wanted to trust, but then I was kind of dancing back and forth like as I
Uh-huh.
learned to trust. And then I finally was like, "Fine, I'm going to surrender." And I remember this feeling of surrender. And but then that was like that had like more beautiful expansive feeling in it.
Hmm.
And then it got to the point of a devotion, and within the devotion, that's when I felt like a love story was forming. And why I love Mark Gaffney's work so much was that part of my personal cosmology is written that I live in a cosmoerotic universe.
Hmm.
And that is like that what my soul desires, and it's also like what my parts love to do. So like my ego is involved in this.
Right.
And when I pursue that, what I love and desire, then like my I'm alive, and the more alive I am, the more I'm able to um be of service.
Right.
And
Yes.
yes, and
Yes.
so in that process, that for me has felt um the thing that my younger self desired was to be loved, and I thought because of the programming it was being chosen by a man, because that's
Hmm.
the dominant culture programming, especially in the 90s, early 2000s. um in that like really fleeting feeling of being chosen by a man, like it was just like this little short window of time.
Hmm.
That's how I feel about myself and my relationship to the universe now.
Yes.
It's like the internal love story and then the external love story with humanity is so beautiful and deep within myself that like it was so worth it. Like, and I like feel sad for my younger self, but also super proud at the same time. So like I'm
Right.
still grieving like, wow, you had to go through that. And also so proud because she got me to here, right?
Right.
And but that feeling of being in contact with your soul, your light inside of you, and to be understanding that like the thing I love to do most is to hold, like to be a guide on this earth and to
Hmm.
be an artist. And when I do those things, that's what I'm actually what the universe wants from me.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah. So basically, what we're saying is it's worth it. It's worth it.
Mhm.
And the more you do it, the easier it gets too. The more you do it, you will be in touch with so many aspects of yourself, and you'll be able to speak through those aspects. And you will be able to help people relate to you, and you'll be able to relate with others. Like you're building mm, you're building what I call the Holy Trinity, which is your celestial self, your uh, physical self, and your ability to alchemize, in between those places, between heaven and earth. So you're building a very beautiful machine. Well, I don't want to call it machine. You're building a very beautiful vessel, that can hold your light and can hold your earthly experiences. And you have an understanding of what to do with all of that. So it's really valuable. It's very valuable work.
Yeah, I used to just
Or
live.
play, work and play.
Yeah, it's both. Yeah.
Yeah,
I used to live in like utter confusion.
right. Same.
And while I like what you're saying about it does get easier, even though it gets easier because you can like you have tools, you know how to use them, you know how to process through things, but then
Yes.
it also like also that also evolves too, so it keeps you on your toes.
Yes.
Um but yeah, the feeling of living through your soul is like, oh my gosh, it's like you it's so strange because it's like you get to enjoy your life here right now, your human experience, like in such a greater way,
Yeah.
and also get to experience the expanse of it all too.
Right.
And like, which I think the expanse could be like the language of the universe, like when you're like you know and understand it. It's kind of like learning to if you were learning Spanish at first, like you just know a couple words, but now like it's like a whole language. It's like I speak that language
Right.
and I can hear it and I'm talking and I'm interacting, and it doesn't feel like I'm trying to figure out what the sentences are like I did at the
Yeah.
beginning.
You can understand the language of the universe and your celestial being. To
Mhm.
me, when you were talking about the soul led life, it was almost like I saw an image of myself sliding down all these rainbows and never getting hurt or never getting cut. It was like, wee, wee. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Okay. So I think this is a great place to end.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. We did it.